Hi everyone, my name is Mr. Gibson and I am the band director at both Scenic Hills and Saybolt Elementary Schools, and in this video I want to talk to you about the different instruments found in the band. This video is going to have 3 parts. In the first part of the video, I'm going to talk about the difference between brass and woodwind instruments by introducing you to the saxophone, the trumpet, and the French horn. In the second part of the video, I'm going to talk to you about the high woodwind instruments, which include the flute, the oboe, and the clarinet. And in the final part of the video, I'm going to talk to you about the low brass instruments, which include the trombone, the baritone or euphonium, and the tuba. Finally, at the end of the video, you're going to hear a little bit about percussion instruments. Let's get started. Hey Springfield, I hope you guys are doing well. In this video, I'm going to be explaining the difference between brass instruments and woodwind instruments by playing 3 different instruments. First, we have the French horn. The French horn sounds like this. And this is a brass instrument. The next brass instrument we have is a trumpet, and it sounds like this. And finally, we have this woodwind instrument. Notice that it sounds a lot different than those 2 brass instruments that I just played. So, what makes this saxophone a woodwind instrument and this trumpet a brass instrument? I mean, they're both made of metal. Where does the whole wood part come into the equation? Let's start at the beginning of what makes these 2 instruments fundamentally different. And that's how we play them using our mouths. This is the saxophone mouthpiece. And on the saxophone mouthpiece, we have this piece of wood called a reed. It's a really thin piece of wood. You see how thin that is right there? What happens is, when you blow air into the mouthpiece, this piece of wood vibrates really fast up against this black part, and that is how sound is produced. Now this is a brass mouthpiece, and what you have to do is you have to make the vibrations happen on your own lips, and it goes like this. When I do that into a mouthpiece, but then if I have an instrument attached to it, oh, it makes it sound way cooler. Check it out. Notice how that works? So, what do both of these instruments have in common? Buttons! On the trumpet or the French horn, when I press buttons, it makes my note go down, like this. Check it out. On the saxophone, I have a lot more buttons, almost like 20 of them, but that's okay. Different combinations do the same thing, come out with different notes. The last thing I want to talk about in today's video is one fun fact for each of these instruments. While the modern trumpet has buttons and looks like this, the original trumpet was made over 3,000 years ago and didn't have any buttons at all. These were made of wood that was hollowed out with tools or with insects. When most people think of the saxophone, they think of the alto saxophone, which is pictured here. But the whole saxophone family has more than 4 instruments. On the left, you have the soprano saxophone, which plays really high notes. On the right, you have the baritone saxophone, which plays really low notes. Now, what instrument do you see here? The French horn? What if I told you it's not from France? The French horn that we know is actually a German instrument. To review, let's go over the instruments that we learned about in this video. First, we have the saxophone. And the saxophone is a woodwind instrument. Next, we have the French horn, which is a brass instrument. And finally, we have the trumpet, which is also a brass instrument. Now let's talk about the high woodwind instruments. Hey Springfield, in this video I'm going to introduce you to the high woodwind instruments. This includes the oboe, the flute, and the clarinet. First, I'm going to play the same song on all three of these instruments so you can listen for the difference between the three. Let's get started. First, let's hear the flute. Now, I'm going to play it on the oboe. Here we go. Now, let's listen to this on the clarinet. Ready? Have you ever heard any of these instruments before? Maybe you heard them in a movie or in a video game or a TV show. Maybe you've gone to the orchestra or a band concert before and you've heard them there. Either way, I hope you enjoyed them. Now let's talk about how they are similar before we talk about how they are different. The first time I saw a woodwind instrument, I was kind of intimidated because of how many buttons I see on this instrument. But don't worry, as you learn the instrument, you understand that there are different combinations of fingerings that cause the notes to either go up or down. Here is an example. That was me playing going up, and now I'm going to walk back down. This is what makes these instruments different. It's the mouthpieces that are at the top of each instrument. They make unique sounds like this. Clarinet, flute, oboe. I know, it sounds pretty goofy when I just play on the mouthpiece, but when I add a whole entire instrument to it, it makes it sound a lot cooler, like this. Now, get ready for some fast facts about the high woodwind instruments. The first flute was made over 35,000 years ago, and they used to make it using stone and wood. Now, they're made out of metal, and they're very, very fancy. While most people are used to seeing clarinets that look like this, there's actually over 10 instruments in the whole clarinet family. These instruments go from really small instruments to really big instruments like you see at the top of the picture. An orchestra has string instruments, woodwind instruments, and brass instruments. They all listen to the oboes play a tuning note, and that way they all know that they are going to sound correct together. It's a really important job for the oboe player. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and were able to learn a little bit about these three instruments. To review, this one is called the clarinet, this silver one is called the flute, and this one is called the oboe. Maybe you'll play one of these instruments one day. So far in the video, everyone, we've talked about the difference between the brass and the woodwind instruments. We've talked about all of the woodwind instruments so far, and a couple of the brass instruments, the high brass instruments, and now we're going to talk about three more instruments in this part of the video, the low brass instruments, starting off with the trombone. As you can see, the trombone is the only instrument that uses a slide to change notes. As you play it, once you start a note when the slide is all the way in, as you put the slide out, you heard the note go down. And then when I bring it back in, the note goes back up. I know the trombone and the baritone that you're about to see in the next part of the video look really different, but what they do have in common is the same exact mouthpiece. That means that they can play the same notes. The only difference is trombone has a slide and baritone has a button.
Like the trombone, the mouthpiece is significantly bigger than the trumpet and French horn. In fact, the mouthpiece on a euphonium or baritone horn is exactly the same as the trombone. Now that we've attached the mouthpiece to the baritone horn or euphonium, you will discover that it has a much warmer sound than the trombone.
Some people call the baritone the baby version of the instrument I'm going to show you next. The tuba. As you can see, the tuba is the biggest instrument in the brass family, and it also uses a really big brass mouthpiece. You have to use your lungs to fill up this entire instrument, but it's just like the trumpet, the French horn, and the baritone in that you use a mouthpiece and you press these buttons. Now it's time for some fast facts about the trombone, the baritone, and the tuba. The trombone is a really cool instrument because it performs both in an orchestra and also in a big jazz band. There's another word for the baritone, and that is the euphonium. They look pretty much the same, but they are a little different. The tuba is the instrument that I play. One time I played it at the Phillies game for the Star-Spangled Banner. It's also the largest instrument, and if you stretched it out all the way, there'd be over 18 feet of metal. Now let's go back to the beginning and review all of the instruments that we've talked about in this video that you all could be playing next year in 4th grade band. Let's start by reviewing all of the woodwind instruments by the highest note playing instruments to the lowest note playing instruments, starting with the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, and the lowest woodwind instrument, the saxophone. Now let's talk about the brass instruments, starting from the highest instrument to the lowest instrument, beginning with the trumpet, the French horn, the trombone, and the tuba. The last instrument family that we offer in Springfield is the percussion family. This includes the snare drum, the bell kit or xylophone, the bass drum, the triangle, the tambourine, and crash cymbals. In the fall, everyone's going to have an opportunity to try out these instruments and see which one is the best fit for you. Now, we can't guarantee you that you're going to get the instrument that is your first choice, but you are guaranteed that you will be getting an instrument and you will be in band or orchestra in 4th grade. I hope this video was informative and you learned a lot about the instruments that are found in band. I want you to go back to the beginning of the video, watch it again, and make a list of what your top 3 instruments are that you're going to want to try out in the fall. Again, my name is Mr. Gibson, and I hope you guys have a really good summer break. Bye, Springfield.